2011, after the Egyptian revolution ousted longtime dictator Hosni Mubarak and rocked the Arab world, Egyptians discovered that in many ways it was a country that was unknown to them. An Egyptian writer and satirist explained the new phenomena to me. He said it was as if we were looking into a mirror and now what we saw was the face of the Taliban. And what he was referring to was the rise of Islamists of all different shades after the revolution. In the summer of 2011, Islamists took over Egypt's iconic Tahrir Square, holding up Qurans, calling for the implementation of Islamic law known as Sharia. The Muslim Brotherhood were there in force. Members of the Jamaat Islamiyah, a terrorist group that massacred 58 tourists and 6 Egyptians in 1997 at Queen Hatshepsut's temple in Luxor. They were there with pictures of the blind Sheikh Omar Abdurrahman, who's in a U.S. prison. You had ultra-conservative Salafis were there, and they were holding up posters of Osama bin Laden. Egyptian liberals called it Kandahar Friday. Tahrir Square, the epicenter of the public uprising against the Mubarak regime, had changed that day from a melting pot of Egyptians of all political stripes calling for bread, freedom, and social justice to one where they chanted, "Egypt is Islamic." As a foreign correspondent covering Egypt and the larger Middle East, I report on wars, revolutions, political upheaval, among many other topics. But covering religious events or political events with religious overtones has become commonplace. I am speaking now of Egypt, the most populous country in the Middle East, because this is where the world watched Islamist parties and an Islamist presidential candidate come to power and ultimately be disposed. For example, in 2011, I traveled down the Nile to Upper Egypt, to the city of Kenna, just an hour's drive north of Luxor, to interview a Christian whose ear was cut off by a Salafi who deemed him to be immoral. Support for the Islamists is strong in Upper Egypt. One analyst there referred to President Morsi as not the president of Egypt, but the president of Upper Egypt. While there, I interviewed 3 Salafis who agreed to meet only if I wore a scarf over my hair. During the 2-hour interview, they refused to look at me and instead stared down at the table. But what they said was illuminating. They said that their aim was to take Egypt back to the Islamic state of the Middle Ages. Also, during this time, attacks on Egyptian Christians have risen in the 3 years since the revolution. In one desperately impoverished area on the outskirts of Cairo, after another one of these attacks, a Christian activist said he feared a season of blood would wash across Egypt. Religion factors heavily in Egypt and the Middle East, of course, with the majority of Islamists taking control of Egypt's parliament after the 2011 revolution. Egypt witnessed a rise in Islamist rhetoric in the parliament and in the courts, as well as a political infighting between various Islamist political groups. One parliamentary stood and intoned the call to prayer in the parliamentary chamber. Another tried to call and shut him down. An Islamist lawyer filed a court case against billionaire businessman Naguib Sawiris, a Coptic Christian and founder of a liberal Egyptian political party. The charge was insulting Islam for posting a tweet that depicted Disney's Mickey and Minnie Mouse in ultra-conservative Islamist garb, Mickey with a beard, Minnie with a veil and a face covering. I went to that court trial, and the lawyer called the tweet a crime against humanity. Afterwards, another explained to me that it was degrading to put a veil on a mouse. Sawiris was ultimately found not guilty in that case, but faced other charges for the same tweet around the country. I think he's had them all resolved now. Another Salafi jihadist went on Egyptian television to call for the destruction of the Sphinx and the pyramids, describing them as idols, pagan idols that could be worshipped. When I interviewed Egyptian shopkeepers and tour guides who live and work next to the pyramids, they responded with a firm pledge of, "Let him try, we will kill him." So the idea of restoring an Islamic caliphate across the Middle East is not something new among Islamists. We saw this happening last year, as we saw happening with ISIS and its brutal onslaught. Um, at a presidential campaign rally for Mohammed Morsi in the industrial delta city of Mahalla, Islamist rhetoric was widely prevalent. One speaker who attended many of Morsi's rallies, Safwat Hagazi, said that Morsi was leading the way to the creation of a modern Islamic caliphate, and its capital would not be Cairo but would be Jerusalem. And he led the crowds in chants of millions of martyrs marched towards Jerusalem. Jerusalem is our goal. We shall pray in Jerusalem or die as martyrs on its threshold. In the run-up to the June 30th, 2013 massive street protests that led to Morsi's ouster by Egypt's military, public criticism was widespread of both Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood from which he hails. Morsi had named a member of the Jama'a Islamiyya as governor of Luxor, provoking an enormous outcry in that and other tourist cities. And many Muslims told me that Morsi was a president only of the Muslim Brotherhood and not of Egypt. On June 30th, as angry and determined Egyptians filled the streets of the cities across the country, Muslims and Christians came together to chant, "Leave Morsi." Over and over in those days, I heard from many Egyptian Muslims that they were very angry with the Muslim Brotherhood and Morsi, and they felt that they were telling them that they were not good Muslims. The response of those, and I heard this over and over again, was that, who are they to say that I am not a good Muslim? And as the rise of Islamists in Egypt emboldened like-minded Islamists in the region, the ouster of Morsi and his subsequent bloody crackdown on his supporters reverberated across the region. In Jordan, I interviewed Muslim Brotherhood members. They really wanted to speak about Egypt. They wanted to do an interview with me, and they wanted to know if that many people really like Sisi, the general who had ousted Morsi to popular acclaim and who was then running for president. He seemed upset when I said, yes, indeed they do. Also, it was interesting, in Istanbul, I met an academic who opposes Turkish President Recep Erdogan and his ruling AKP party. He spoke of his past experiences in Cairo and described how conservative he found the city to be, and he was very puzzled as to how that conservative population overthrew an Islamist president. It just didn't make sense to him. And I explained to him what Egyptians had told me. One Cairo shopkeeper put it this way: most Egyptians want to live in peace, work, watch football, maybe date, that is all. When the Brotherhood came to power, it was like someone stealing your identity, your culture. It was personal. As a journalist, it's vital for me to recognize that various ideological schools exist within the Muslim community as they do within other religions. In 2002, 7 months after the 9/11 terrorist attacks in the United States, I was asked to look at various mosques in the city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I ended up focusing on one mosque called At-Tawheed that was run by Saudi students, and its school called Al-Andalus. What I found was that they were putting out an Arabic magazine. It was called As-Sirat al-Mustaqim, which is called The Straight Path, which contained extremist articles calling for jihad against the Zionist crusaders, advocating the killing of Jews, denouncing non-Muslims as infidels and moderate Muslims who didn't agree with them as apostates. The website of the school had links to jihadi movements around the world, from Chechnya, Eritrea, Indonesia, Pakistan, to Philippines, to Uzbekistan. And they also linked to another website in the States, in Ypsilanti, Michigan, outside of Detroit, that just 4 months before the 9/11 terrorist attacks posted a series of 4 Arabic language martyrdom operation fatwas from Islamist clerics in the Gulf. One fatwa stated that the modern method of a martyrdom operation or suicide mission is to crash an airplane on a crucial enemy target to cause great casualties. So this was up in the United States 4 months before the attack on a Saudi-run website. The Saudi graduate living in the United States was put on federal trial in Idaho for posting this and other extremist material as part of a material support for terrorism. He was later deported to Saudi Arabia. Today, from where I normally sit in the Middle East, religion will continue to be an important part of any journalist's reporting. And while getting to the right places to report these stories may pose unique and sometimes dangerous difficulties, it is crucial to help readers understand what is happening with all this turmoil in the region. In Iraq and Syria, ISIS and other radical groups are attacking minority Christians and Yazidis. In Egypt, the military is battling an insurgency against a group that has aligned itself with ISIS. Other Islamist groups have also appeared detonating bombs in Cairo and other cities. Today, more disaffected youth across the Middle East are supporting ISIS and its idea of an Islamic caliphate than ever before. At the end of 2014, I traveled to Upper Egypt province of Minya, where many churches, Christian schools, orphanages, businesses were burned in 2003. Angry Islamists torched dozens of churches around the country. Some churches are being rebuilt, but others still remain in ruins, with Islamist graffiti still visible on their scorched walls. One priest told me, "We have the Muslim Brotherhood, the Salafis, thugs, and 60% illiteracy." He said, "This is a time bomb." Not surprisingly, many Christians feel uneasy about their security in these towns and villages that are desperately trying to find common ground with moderate Muslims. But even today, two policemen were killed by masked armed gunmen in this town who were guarding a church, which is today Christmas Eve for Orthodox Christians. In 2013, I traveled to the city of Fayoum to investigate some of the burned churches. At a burned Bible Society building, I found that an Egyptian Christian had written, "Love your enemies," on the door. Such a sentiment is heartening to find, especially among people who have suffered so much for so long and who face an even graver growing threat than in decades past. But love seems to be a commodity that seems to be in short supply in today's Middle East. The question remains, as the rising tide of extremist violence continues against religious minorities, Christians, Yazidis, Mandaeans, Shabak, and others, how long will it be before reconciliation happens between these religious factions? And if it does happen, how many minorities will be wiped or pushed out of their ancient homelands?